Hi, and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people, for the people.
Perfect synergy.
And today we are going to have another episode of Falsifiable Fridays, and I'm going to continue with more talk about all the ways in which women are not treated equally and fairly in society. So this week I'm going to focus on women in STEM. And with that, I think I want to first just invite everyone here to really think about the world that we live in right now. And if you could envision a world where women were in positions of power. And I wonder what you would think. I wonder what you would think about the ways in which we socialize our children. I wonder how you change your perceptions of women versus men. And I wonder what kind of consequences that also have on future generations. So we have women in power, right? In this version, at least our make-believe thought experiment for right now. And I want you to also really think about a very popular show. This show is called The Big Bang Theory. I personally don't like it, but I've also never seen a full episode. Maybe it's better than what I think. I've seen clips and here and there, and I just haven't been able to watch a full episode. But I do know that it's a super popular show. It's done at this point, but it has been very popular in the past, and I mean, people are still definitely watching it. So why am I bringing this show up, right? There are men in that show, and those men are portrayed in a certain way. There are women in that show that are portrayed in a certain way. Most of the men are extremely smart people that they have their motivations and aspirations, and they have their own quirks, and they're allowed to like what they like, and they're just kind of allowed to live, right? And then there's only one woman on that show that gets that same sort of freedom and liberty, surrounded by men. And I wonder, on average, there's 17 million people that are watching each episode. And I mean, that's not going to be the same 17 million each and every time. That's going to change from episode to episode. So, I mean, it reaches quite a lot of people, right? What would happen if those 17 million people were seeing, instead of a group of men that were able to do all this, a group of women that could do all this? And maybe all the roles were sort of reversed, that the men that are there, maybe there's one that is very smart and able to hang with the women that are also very smart, and then one man who's not so smart, who gets treated pretty poorly and things like that. And then we have the rest of the women that are the motivated, smart, intellectual people that have their interests and are allowed to pursue their interest in a very intense way. What would happen? I do wonder, maybe it'd be great, right? Maybe it'd be exactly what we need as far as representation, that there are plenty of women that have these interests and they're allowed to pursue them, and they can be interested and just as engaged and just as smart as men. I also wonder if that was the only change that we made in society, though, if Big Bang Theory became mostly about women and not about men, that viewership would probably also decrease. And I wonder why, right? Why if we made that switch, right? Because I mean, that it goes against the grain of what society currently believes. If we made that switch, would 17 million people be watching every single episode on average? Probably not, right? And so, in thinking about why, you have to think about this idea of what is accepted in society. What are the stereotypes that we kind of play into. If we are thinking about the prototypical scientist or mathematician or physicist, they're not going to be women, right? You might be able to get to a place where you can consciously think of women for all these positions and be the first person. I mean, and the first person that you think of is a woman, but we're not currently there, right? So you can think that like, okay, so now we're just like, some people might say like, oh, you're forcing women to be in these roles, and like it's just not realistic, that like this is not what happens. But like I kind of want to say like, why not, right? We don't know. I think potentially maybe there is truth to that, right? But like we don't actually know. And so if we could actually just like open the doors here and allow for that to happen, then what would happen? Maybe women will be equally represented, maybe not, but we don't actually know. So we have plenty of representation of certain types of identities and backgrounds that are allowed to be in STEM, typically white men. But there's also a fair amount of like other diverse backgrounds. You get Asian men. You also get, I mean, South Asian men in particular, right? They very much get to be represented in these roles, for better or worse. There's pros and cons, of course. But when we were thinking about who fits the mold of someone in STEM, it's very, very, very rarely like that. Like you're just going to start thinking that it's a woman, and so we can change those norms, right? That they are made up at this point. There is a lot of ways in which men have been like cherished in these kinds of roles, and women have been disparaged to try to pursue these roles. And so that's exactly like what I want to talk about here. If we even think about like some of the other just pieces of evidence that you can think of in society that if not completely like outright say women are not allowed here, at least they are implicitly kind of saying like, oh, like these are the people that are most likely to be here. So what do I mean by that? In a list of the top scientists, this is a list of 150 top scientists, only 26 were women. That's a pretty stark difference between men and women here being represented. And I mean, this is one list, and there are plenty of other lists that are out there. In any of the lists that I have seen, it has never been 50-50, that's for sure. That on its face doesn't say anything about like why that's happening, but it does show that it is happening. And so we need to figure out why that's happening, right? And I mean, I think there's a good chunk of that is due to the ways in which women are represented and men are represented, even when it comes to like simpler things of like media, right? When it comes to like Marvel movies and like superhero movies and things like that, right? Like, I mean, there's a whole lot that can be said about like the gender norms there, but even when it comes to like very specific characters that are like scientists and things like that, they still are predominantly men. Think of Doctor Strange. Think of Iron Man, right? Like these kinds of people that are very I mean, Doctor Strange, he was a surgeon. Iron Man, I don't actually know a lot about him, but I know that he deals with technology, right? So just these ideas that like they don't have to be men, but they tend to be men because that is what society jives with, right? That can be changed. That can totally be changed. So that is that's part of it, right? That these representations are not clearly mapping onto the kind of equality that we are trying to get here. So I'm talking about all this because of the paper from this week, which is all about research on the different reasons for why women don't necessarily take these STEM kind of trajectories and careers, and what we can do to change that as well. There's plenty out there, but one of the main things that it really focuses on is this idea of identity, that women don't feel like it is part of their identity to be a part of STEM. And also that is very much like supported through society, through other men, through other women, through these roles in media, through the positions and the people that are there. All these different reasons, also very explicit reasons of like academic sexism, that men are better inherently than women at certain things. So I think when it comes to all these identities, yes, of course, part of that is going to be within the women themselves. Do they have any kind of motivation or inclination to want to like do these STEM kind of careers? But then it also comes from our peers, our friends, our family, our teachers, parents in particular, all these other people that are around us that can shape what our identities are, or at least allow the space to us for them to then look into their identities and see like, oh, this actually feels right, this doesn't feel right, whatever. So that's the overview of things. I think you get the point of what I'm saying here. I have some questions that I want to pose given this research. So, one question, and I don't know if there's really an answer just yet, but I would be very curious about your thoughts and opinions on this. I have my opinions. I have heard of some opinions as well from very high profile kind of people. Um, so, the fact that there is this disparity and that women are not nearly as represented in STEM as men. And of course, there's certain sectors of STEM that are more heavily women than men. But aside from that, like the one out of like 100 different potential careers that are out there, right? Aside from that, what can we do? And what do we think of the idea of equal representation of men and women in STEM? So I really ask this also in part because like I've had the very unfortunate experience of having to listen to Jordan Peterson recently, listening to some of his interviews and just kind of seeing like what he thinks and what are his arguments, how are people pushing back against some of his arguments. And I mean, as much as I think that he is kind of off base with his perception and the kind of evidence that he has strung together, I think even he would agree that there isn't equal opportunity for men and women to get these kind of positions and to follow these kind of paths. I mean, I think he would probably look at himself and be like, "Oh, like I've done it myself. Like I've gone against the grain where I'm a professor in a mostly woman-dominated field." And like, oh, geez, like that's barely true, first of all, and also like I don't even think I can completely agree with that. But aside from that, right? And I mean, I can say more on that as well. I mean, he definitely has a good way of just like he spins evidence in a certain way. But aside from that, even him, right, he would say that there aren't equal opportunities. And I think he would say that, like, yes, he wants equal opportunities. Most people in society would also agree, like, very easily and clearly, people should have equal opportunities. What they do in practice, though, of course, very different. But people should have different, equal opportunities. So what I'm trying to say here, and the question again that I'm trying to pose is that even if there are equal opportunities, should there be equal representation? What if there really is some sort of difference? That what if men really do like certain things versus women? We don't know. We have never had a time in society where that has been the case, that men and women can equally pursue these things, to know what their interests actually are. And like, even if we tried this experiment for like a little bit in society and like really removed all of the other barriers, which like good luck with that, right? But like what I mean by good luck with that is that's not going to happen in overnight, right? And that people are going to be very resistant to that, even if like structurally maybe everything is equal, there's still all the other implicit bias that is within us. And you can check out any of the other weeks that I've talked about so far to hear more about some of those implicit biases. But um, when it comes to equal opportunities, we've never had that. And so we don't actually know where people fall. People can very naturally fall in different areas, right? Maybe women really do like something else. Maybe it's like a 55-45 split versus a 50-50. Maybe it's a larger gap. Maybe it's 70-30. Like, who actually knows? We don't. And so anyone who could ever claim that we know is wrong. And so all I want to say is that, like, we we not only have to like give those opportunities for equality, but also allow the pieces to fall where they do. But also, it's not just about the entrance to these kind of careers and trajectories. We also have to then change the system itself, and how it supports men versus women, how it might attack men versus women. And I more specifically mean the ways in which it's attacking women through things like harassment in their workplace and things like that, right? So that's the main thing. Um, what is right? I don't know. If it's 50-50, if it's something else, we don't quite know yet. But we should always be working toward eliminating any potential barrier that is, I mean, for anyone, but like really, that is especially affecting women from getting into these kinds of careers. And so that could be the initial first step. That could also just be the culture of the workplace, that like maybe they're there, but they end up leaving more often, right? Okay. Um, there's another part of this, right? That it's not all women that are not taking opportunities in STEM. Actually, there are groups of women that are more likely to be in STEM. And there are plenty of reasons for that, and not necessarily reasons that like I want to say that like are great, but they do happen. And so if we can understand why there are certain groups of women that are more likely to be in STEM, maybe we can start to like glean like, oh, like these are some of the ways that we can motivate women. These are some of the ways that we can also support women. And so some of these groups include, in general, Asian women tend to be more likely to be in STEM. And then also first generation African Americans are also more likely to be in STEM. And so what is it? What is it about these groups? What is more positively allowing them to take these opportunities? But I say all that, and I also want to say, just because it happens for those groups doesn't mean it's going to just automatically happen in the same way for other groups. Even if we took the reasons for why it works for Asian women or for first generation African Americans, we can't just say like, oh, like these are the magic ingredients, and then let's apply them to other groups of people, because everyone has different struggles, different ways in which society perceives them, different ways in which they can actually like interact with other people in society, among plenty of other things. There's just so many different differences that could really change why it works for certain groups versus other groups. So I think that's a starting place for us to understand why it does work for certain groups, and then see from there what happens. The other thing I want to say with this, though, is that research has done a really bad job of this. Research has done a very poor job of looking beyond white women in STEM. Of course, it makes sense. That's most likely going to be the group that there's just more white women to potentially be in STEM. So you just have more participants and people to like actually try to study. But it's such a huge barrier for the same reason that we need to also look at different cultures and see what are the other things that are occurring here, the other struggles versus also the other motivations. So yeah, I think this is also maybe just a call for like, hopefully there's more work on women in color in STEM. But because we definitely cannot just say like, oh, this is what works for white women, so this must work for all women. That'd be a pretty insane approach. given all the different hierarchical structures in society. So, what are some of the things that we should be focusing on? This is the last question that I have for this week. And I think if I haven't said this clearly yet, I'm going to say this clearly now that we cannot just focus on the women. We have to make sure that we are focusing on all the other levels and aspects that come with this. All these levels need to be leveled out to create equal opportunities. It cannot just be up to the women. Of course, there are going to be examples of women that have made it past all the odds and like worked very hard and was super motivated and like things like that. That should not be the case. That should not be how people go about life. And so, um, one external thing to women, regardless of their motivations, and I'm not going to say this is all men, all white men. But I am going to say that what literature and research has actually shown is that it tends to be that white boys in particular are definitely a roadblock. That they tend to be the most likely to voice that women should not be in STEM. That it's much more of a boys' field, and so that is something that we should target. Again, I'm not saying that this is all white men. I'm saying that it's just most likely that it is going to come out from a white man. And so what do we do about that? We have to change that culture. We have to change that perception. And also for the white men that don't do this, if they do end up seeing it, are you going to speak up? Are you going to be able to tell other white boys or white men that that's not right? It's much easier to convince somebody and persuade somebody that that's not right when you have that commonality, when you have that similarity with the other person. And so that's one thing that we should target. Of course, this also happens across the board for all men to some degree, but in particular, it's white men. Other things is that we have to make sure that it's not only women supporting women. That is great, of course, that there's that camaraderie and that commonality and like the shared experiences and all of that. But it cannot just be up to women upholding other women. Men and others have to also make sure that we are playing a supporting role, making sure that we are clearing the way in the ways that we can, making sure that we're not making it harder inadvertently, right? For women to be able to just live their lives. It cannot just come from other women. Again, that is great, but like it has to be more than that. We also have to figure out how to give parents the right resources. So this primarily would probably come out of like the educational system, not just to educate women and like and the boys as well that are in these classes, but also what happens after school. How are the parents talking about these things? Are their daughters able to come to them when they have questions? And what do those parents do? So making sure that those parents also have the resources to make sure that their daughters are able to appropriately decide if this is a career that they want to be able to take. And maybe the last thing is, as far as like focusing, would be on the idea of just starting early. That the earlier that you can start in the educational system, even before the educational system, I'm sure, but like as far as the studies show within the educational system, if you start like, let's say in 5th grade, that changes your whole trajectory from there on out. What you do in middle school, what you do in high school is going to change just because like you've had at least a little bit of representation, a little bit of experience with STEM. You're more likely to be like, oh, like I've done something like this before, so let me try some more of that. Versus like, oh, I mean, I've never even heard of this. Like, I don't want to do this. Yeah, so that kind of idea that like you want to start earlier. Things are very open until society tells you otherwise, and yeah, I mean, if society is telling you like, hey, like these are opportunities for everyone, then it's just up to you to decide, is that the opportunity that I want? So that's it. That's it for today. Please do check out some of the other stuff. I go into more detail on these kind of topics on some of my other content. That's all on roomforresearch.com. And then also on social media, I'm at Room for Research. And we're gonna do one more week of talking about women's rights and the ways in which society doesn't quite allow them to have rights next week. And until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.
With the summer breeze, perfect sense.